Hi, and welcome to our webinar on Beyond Physical Safety, the Power of the Social Experience. Thank you for joining us. My name is Anthony Gibbs. I'm the CEO of Sentis, and I'll be your facilitator for today's session, where we're going to unpack the role of the social experience in creating a positive safety organisation in our organisations. Before we launch into the content for today, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians throughout Australia. And we want to recognise their connections to the land, waters and community. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to elders past and present. And we extend this respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. We do this because we value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, culture and knowledge. We at Sentis pay particular attention to this, and it's really important to us. And the way we personally invest in this space is through land conservation in the Pillar Valley in New South Wales. To date, we've invested over $2.25 million in purchasing and restoring land back to its original condition. And we work with the local Indigenous communities to make sure that we're doing that in line with their traditions and their customs also. So meaningful piece of work for Sentis. For those of you who may not be aware of Sentis, we've been around for a number of years doing the work that we do. I think about 21 years this year. We've worked with over 200,000 participants across 500 organisations in 35 countries. We work across a range of heavy industries, as you can see on the screen, with the goal of achieving our mission, which is to change the lives of individuals and organisations for the better every day. So that's a little bit about Sentis and what we stand for. Now we'll jump in and have a look at the reason why most of you will be here, and that is to look at how we can continue to improve and create positive safety cultures within the organisations that we lead. So the way we're going to tackle today's session is going to be in these 5 steps. We're going to move at speed, but I do encourage, as we go through the content and as we work through each step, to please put your questions into either the chat or to the Q&A bar. I'll keep half an eye on those. If I don't manage to see them, one of my co-hosts who are off screen, Morgs or Corinne, will give me a nudge to see if I can get to those questions. So the way we're going to tackle today's content, firstly, is we're going to look at some of the research that we've done in the space. We're going to look at the strengths of across that research that we've seen in the number of organisations in the social space. We're also going to look at some of the areas of greatest opportunity. Those areas mostly being reward recognition, managing risks, and improving employee input into decision making. Some of you may have attended the first version of this webinar with Ben and Amy. If you have, there is a little bit of overlap between webinars, but what we've attempted to do in this webinar is dig a little bit deeper into some practical skills we can apply to shift in each of these areas. A little bit of context about how we went about, I guess, even coming up with this research in the first place. What we've found is that in our time working across a number of organisations at Sentis, we get the great opportunity to get in to the cultural drivers of so many organisations. And you can see on the screen here, what a lot of organisations are looking to understand is where they sit across this maturity curve. And there's a little, if you wanted to take the time, you can scan the QR code and do a little self-assessment if that's something you're interested in. So organisations generally want to understand where they sit in this maturity curve overall, but also what areas of their business could use the greatest focus in order to shift the dial. What we have found as we've done this research over time is that organisations typically get stuck at a typical point. And the point is on the left-hand side of this maturity curve at about that public compliance space. In fact, about 86% of organisations that we work with get stuck in what we would call a negative safety culture. So I guess a little bit about a negative safety culture. Again, it's this left-hand side of this maturity curve here. It's typically a culture where there's a sense within the organisation that safety is something that's done to employees. There's a real compliance-only focus about it. and then there tends to be a leaning towards blame and avoidance when it comes to safety. The big thing that most organizations are pursuing when they work with us is pushing past public compliance and clicking over that private compliance threshold to a place where you've got a culture which is stronger in the ownership and accountability. In these cultures, people are more likely to have discretionary effort around safety, and they're also more likely to focus on a presence of safety as opposed to an absence of harm. So a lot of the, I guess, motivations behind this particular research study, we're looking at how can an average organization make that leap and step from that negative safety culture to a more positive safety culture. I also need to call out at this point that your organization is probably going to have pockets that sit across this entire maturity curve. You'll have some pockets of brilliance and some areas that aren't going so well. We're going to talk in generalizations, but it is useful to think about your organization holistically, but also there may be areas which maybe sit in collaborative, but also some that sit in counterproductive as well. Quick questions popped up. Will these slides be available? Yes, they will be available, as is the research paper that sits behind it. So there's quite a detailed research paper that's going to sit behind that sits behind this presentation today. So if you are interested in digging deeper, you can dive into that, and it's got all the gritty details and some recommendations around this particular topic. So what we've also found in these organizations that predominantly operate in a negative space is that there's other features that pop up over and over and over again. One feature is that only 24% of leaders are perceived to be effective. So that ranking is, individuals within organizations ranking their one-up leader in terms of how effective they perceive that person in their leadership of safety. So 1 in 4 leaders in general are only seen as effective. The rest are seen as ineffective safety leaders. So that is generally one of the precursors of a negative safety culture. What we often also see in a negative safety culture is fairly high underreporting rates of 25+% globally. And in Australia, you can see 31% is the average of a negative safety culture. And we've seen underreporting rates of over 40 or 50%. So we'll dig a little bit into that a little bit more later on. What we also tend to find is there's an incredibly strong correlation between well-being climate and safety leadership and safety culture. So it's a fair bet in most organizations, if your leadership is weak, your safety culture is probably being weak, and probably people's well-being climate is also not great either. And in these cultures, we often also find that about 45% of serious incidents fly under the radar. So that means that, and the byproduct of that is there's often a disproportionate amount of time invested and focused on sort of lower range incidents where bigger ones don't get the attention and the focus that they require. So these are all features that we typically tend to see in those more negative safety cultures play out. So as I said, we saw all this. Our partner clients are saying to us, what can we do to address this? So we went, all right, well, let's dig back into the data and have a look. What trends and themes can we find that could be driving these particular outcomes? And how do we make this a simple and digestible way to tackle things? So the research paper we've built out is this one up on the screen. It's called Unpacking Safety Experiences, Employee Perceptions of Safety Climate. There is a QR code you can scan there if you want to jump on and get that right away. Alternatively, with the slides that will be emailed out later, there'll be an attachment to the resource also. So it's free, it's useful, it's a great conversation starter with different people within your organization. So the particular research study we're unpacking today is drawn from the data set that is represented on the screen. So you can see here close to 30,000 surveys that are stratified from an overall group of 59,000. So close to 60,000 people responded. We went through, cleaned the data, made sure no one industry or one organisation was overrepresented. And then, so the data draws from about, 29,390 individual responses to our safety climate survey. That data is pulled from across 15 countries, 12 industries, 75 organisations, and you can see the split of tenure and age up on the screen there. So pretty hefty data set. So we've got a fair level of confidence about, I guess, some of the insights that we've been able to provide through this. So we're unpacking this data, and in parallel to this, we were doing a lit review for the book that Vanessa and I were writing on leading a positive safety culture, which we'll show you a little bit more about later on. And what we actually found was this really cool phenomena where if you actually break down the drives and the antecedents of safety culture, you can categorize them in three high-level areas in terms of how people experience safety. So this is, when I work into an organization, how does it feel for me from a safety experience to be in that place? Now, what we found is that in organizations that got stuck at the public compliance or below spaces, they often had a pretty singular focus on one aspect of the safety experience, and that is the physical experience. So avoidance of physical harm and risk to the person. So they're putting guardrails and barriers in place. So really heavy focus on compliance and often discipline, heavy policies, heavy procedures, very detailed investigations, and often, this was married up with a whole lot of, I guess, negative perceptions and experiences of the workforce around feelings of knee-jerk reactions from management, blame, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Organizations that were able to move beyond this tended to either, I guess, consciously or intuitively, I think some was by planning, some was through design, broaden their lens on safety to view it in a more holistic safety experience. So these organizations typically identified that, hey, the relationships that we have with people, the social experience that we have with people has a tangible impact on safety. So we're talking here about the quality of relationships with teams and leaders, communication, trust, consultation, input, those sorts of things. What we also found is that people's psychological health and well-being had a pretty significant impact. So how was people's stress? How resilient did they feel? Could they actually speak up if they were feeling like they were stressed or de-stressed or impacted or in a mental way in some way, shape or form? And what we tend to find is that these three things fit. And in these cultures that are able to break through that threshold, if you think about this positive safety model that's on the screen, is a bit like a fidget spinner. These things were kind of spinning in a positive direction, positively reinforcing one another. We're in organizations where these things weren't working so well together. There was in the process of trying to enforce a more positive physical experience for people, the social and the psychological experiences of the workforce were often degraded in some way, shape or form. So for example, an incident may occur, an incident investigation is taken place. The way that incident investigation is taken place was experienced by the individual or the individuals involved in the incident to be a negative blame-based affair, impacted on the social experience, and then often impacted on the psychological experience at the same time. And so in the desire to actually make safety better, sometimes organizations were making things worse. So we go, all right, well, these are three interesting categories that are starting to play out. Which is the one that if an organization had to focus somewhere, they would get the biggest bang for buck on quickest? So we did that analysis, and what the data found is that the social experience for most organizations was both the thing they were doing the worst and the best when it came to safety. but it was also the area that if they could harness it and make it better, they could get some really tangible movements fairly quickly. Now, it probably sounds a bit weird, me saying it was both the worst and the best, but I'll unpack the data a little bit more in just a moment. I'll start to make a little bit of sense. To you. You might be saying, well, why does the social experience matter so much? Or some of you will probably be going, yeah, that's intuitive, no joke. I've known that for a long time. A lot of this comes back to, I guess, that idea or that concept of the social brain, in that, you know, our brains will I guess, read and experience social threat in very similar ways to the ways that we experience physical threat or physical safety. So yeah, what we're finding is that, yeah, a lot of people's brains are elevated because they don't feel socially safe and connected for whatever reason within their workplace. That's triggering a threat response. And then that's having a bunch of downstream effects that are meaning that we're not able to get the best possible results out of safety. So, so what we're looking at here is we're really looking at, well, how do we best harness positivity, a reward response in people's brains? So people start to frame safety up as, you know, an energizing, important thing that they want to put discretionary effort into, as opposed to a hassle. Because again, in these environments, often people are viewing safety itself as more of a threat than being involved in a safety incident. So if we can start to address that, we can start to really turn the dial on safety really nicely and fairly quickly. So for those of you who aren't experienced with the social brain, or even those of you who are, we've got a little quick video here from Sentis that talks about the social brain and how it experiences the workplace. Just a reminder for any of you who aren't aware, these videos are readily available on YouTube. So if you like what I'm talking about here and you want to share this video with anyone, you just go to YouTube, sentis.com, the Sentis channel on YouTube. This video is there ready to go. So we'll watch this and we'll have a quick conversation about it.
Humans are social beings that thrive when working in groups. Throughout history, we have enhanced our chances of survival by collectively sharing things such as resources, knowledge, and workloads. Alternatively, isolation or rejection from a group could have decreased our survival chances. As a result, our brain is highly aware of our ongoing social status and possible threats or rewards to this. Today, the workplace is one of the biggest social environments the brain experiences. Our brain is constantly providing us with feedback on our social interactions with others. We need to know when things are working in our favor or when our social situation may be under threat. Our brain interprets our social interactions through the use of neural pathways and chemical messages commonly used for pleasure and pain. For example, when our brain recognizes potential rewards from a social interaction, it releases chemicals along the same neural pathways associated with pleasure, making us feel physically good. When we feel threatened, rejected, or taken advantage of, the same pathways that tell us we are in physical pain are activated. Our brains don't always operate in isolation to one another. We often trigger a threat or reward response to the people around us. We may not even realize we are doing this. So the next time you interact with someone at work, consider what social messages you may be sending and the impact you may be having on their brain.
So that's your social brain. Now, the beautiful thing about, I guess, this research is it really aligns nicely with some of the recent, I guess, focus on psychosocial risk legislation. It actually builds a business case to address psychosocial hazards within your organization, not only because it reduces the likelihood of obviously causing a psychological injury, but in fact, addressing a number of those hazards, improving the social experience and improving the psychological experience are likely to have a payoff for the physical safety experience of people as well. By making people more socially safe, by addressing psychosocial safety, you know, the argument here is you will make the organization holistically much, much safer. So, yeah, the real challenge that we're throwing out to organizations is, as opposed to viewing those pieces of work as discrete issues to address, how do we look at those together to create the best possible positive safety experience for the people that we lead? So To dive into the research, we'll start first of all with the strengths that we've commonly seen across organisations. I'm not good at using a mouse today, but there we go. Okay, so these are the strengths that we saw come from in the social space. So most team members had a genuine belief that safety is everyone's duty to maintain, which is really interesting because a lot of leaders that talk to us go, oh, the guys on the floor, they just don't care about safety. This research is actually saying that most people do. This research is also saying that most team members want to look out for each other's safety and well-being. It says that they have expectations that each other work safely. They feel that they generally have a really positive relationship with their direct supervisor, and they actually feel comfortable talking about safety with their direct supervisor. So interesting. Have a think about that data. Have a think about that data and what that tells you, because what I see in that data is that a lot of people actually want to do safety and believe in safety and are saying that they actually accept personal responsibility and accountability for safety, despite, I guess, that being a common concern in a number of organizations. It's also saying that those people believe that their supervisors care about safety, despite often the front line being perceived in a number of organizations as being one of the major challenges when it comes to shifting safety within a business. So if they're the strengths, what are the weaknesses? And this is where it kind of gets really interesting. We're a little bit surprised by some of this stuff. What the research actually found is that a number of the gripes that people had around how they experienced safety didn't sit with their direct leader or their peers. In fact, sat at an organizational level and significantly impacted on their social brain. It felt there were activities and behaviors by the organization that they felt either disempowered or disengaged them in some way or unfairly treated them in some way. So the 4 areas that we sort of identified here were fairness of how mistakes during high risk activities are managed. Employees felt like they didn't have sufficient opportunity to contribute to organizational decisions. They felt like they weren't recognized and rewarded for when they did safety. And they felt like change and communication was not managed well. So the fascinating thing about this research is for the average person on the floor, who is the major sample group of this, they felt that these are the 4 things that the organization holistically did, which not only didn't help their safety experience, but in fact had a negative impact on how they experienced safety within the organizations that they led. So I guess there's good news and bad news in that. I think, the bad news is I think a lot of this pushes the finger back to higher levels of leaders within organizations and more, I guess, systemic challenges. But the good news is, we know what this is, and these are things which, with a bit of deliberate focus and attention, can be, relatively directly addressed to create positive change within organizations. So that's what we're going to dig into next. We're going to dig into, if they're the areas that the researchers suggest is going to move the dial, what do we do? So reward and recognition, we're going to focus on it in 3 areas: reward and recognition, how fairly mistakes are treated, and how do people contribute to decision making. All right, so we're going to kick off by having a chat about reward and recognition first. Reward and recognition, really, really important because of the impact that, again, has on our social brain. When we get rewarded for something, when we get recognized for something, oxytocin and dopamine is released and we feel good. We feel good for being recognized for the efforts that we've put into place. But unfortunately, and we identified this in a previous study that we did. In negative safety cultures, so public, counterproductive and public safety cultures, this is an area that is done particularly badly. So employee safety performance relates to how fairly do I feel like, how readily am I recognized for my positive contributions to safety? So it's pulled out in that cultural report. We also find it in our safety leadership assessment over and over and over again. We're recognizing when we do the perceptions of direct leaders is perceived as not effective. Now, what this means for, I guess, your average employee out there in the field is that they often feel like they're working safely a lot of the time. Working safely, working safely, working safely. And I think it's a universal we often talk about is it's very rare that people go to work with the intention of getting hurt or hurting someone else. So there's often positive intent. There's often lots of things that people are doing well in regards to safety. And the experience that we get reported back to us over and over and over again is they could be working safely all this time. No one says boo to them. No one says boo to a grasshopper about them working safely. Something goes wrong, boom, it all happens. They get all sorts of attention, most of it not good. And even the best run incident investigation processes are often viewed and perceived and experienced as negative if there hasn't been, I guess, a balanced proportion of positive feedback that has led into that particular experience. Now, what you need to pile on top of this also as a challenge is that from a social brain perspective, we experience negativity around something, criticism, threats, much more strongly than we experience rewards. And again, we will have all experienced this outside of safety. If we could be driving from home to work, someone lets us merge, we give them a little wave, happy days, driving. Everyone's got manners and being courteous. Someone cuts us off, all of a sudden the brain goes from calm to fight or flight. Our brains are actually sort of hardwired to be more sensitive to these social threats. So as a result, we really need to be thinking about the balance of recognition versus corrective coaching and challenging people. So some things to consider when it comes to building a culture of recognition. Firstly, one thing we really challenge organizations to consider really carefully is what do you recognize? You can easily create a bit of a rod for your own back or create unwanted behaviors by focusing on the wrong things, i.e., an absence of harm. So what we really encourage organizations to think about is what does good safety look like, and get it clearly identified. So the first two steps there are, what does positive safety behaviors look like within your organization? Perhaps you align them to your values, make a list of them, make sure everyone's really clear on what's expected. Then when leaders get out in the field, we, again, always where possible, see if we can up the time in the field, but actively encouraging leaders to think about the proportion of positive feedback versus corrective or coaching kind of feedback. We'd be really encouraging leaders to look at a 5-to-1, 7-to-1 ratio of reward versus challenge kind of interactions if possible. And normally that's pretty easy. Normally we walk past way more safe stuff than not safe stuff that we see. So calling that out and spending time and giving leaders those skills is really, really powerful. Then you've got, when you've got positive behaviors, again, think about what type of reward and recognition is going to work best. Think about your audience, and how you can do that. Immediate is best. So it doesn't always have to be about money or gift cards or anything like that. Sometimes just a sincere, genuine, and immediate bit of feedback, recognizing positive safety work, is as good as anything else. When you get really advanced in this space, what we tend to find really starts to foster a positive safety culture from within is looking at a peer-on-peer recognition program. Sometimes, there are some small monetary elements often involved in getting this momentum built up. But thinking about, right, what do we want to see more of? What do we want to see peers recognize each other for? what's the forums in which they're going to recognize, and how do we get that up and moving can be really, really powerful. Look, the last one here is about addressing safety conflicts. So the other big part of, when we're thinking about recognition is there anywhere where perhaps we're recognizing stuff that we don't want to recognize, or perhaps there's conflict. We're asking someone to perform something in a production space which is overtly opposite to something in the safety space. So getting some time to putting some thought into that and getting some feedback on that can be really powerful for your program. I reckon a lot of people on here have got some amazing reward recognition programs. Like, if anyone's got any ideas or any thoughts about what they've seen well, feel free to chuck them in the chat or the Q&A. I'm sure your peers on the call would love to hear from you. All right, so now we might launch in and take a look at the next, bit of research, which was about managing mistakes and errors. And this is often a really tricky one for organizations to get their head around, because it's a real balance between, was something intentional, was something unintentional, like if we don't discipline someone, is it going to encourage more people to do the same? So there's a whole lot of frames, and it gets really murky and gets really challenging to sort of wrap our heads around, particularly in the safety space. As we dig into this space, there's a couple of, things that we encourage leaders to think about. One is that mistakes are inevitable. We all make mistakes. And if we recognize that and we give people the benefit of the doubt, that can help us come in with a bit of a clearer head in the way that we take a look at things. That's particularly important, our reaction, because it sets the culture. If I go off my head when something negative happens, what we know is that leads to a culture of blame and resentment and distrust, and it drives things underground. Actually drives less accountability. Where we think we're driving more accountability, sometimes actually has the counter effect. But what we do also know is that when leaders respond without blame, it creates more of an opportunity for people to learn. And we can actually create a bit of a culture where people are more likely to speak up sooner, so that we can solve problems faster and get better results quicker. Again, from a social brain perspective, when we make a mistake or admit to making a mistake, it's really hard. Just chemically within our brain, that process of admitting a mistake or being recognized as having made a mistake triggers that threat response. Adrenaline, cortisol kicks in, and it takes real deliberate effort to really have the attitude that I'm going to own up on this. I want to learn from it, to drive a particular behavior to get a result, to get a better result next time around. In fact, the natural instinct for most leaders and most people is to not take accountability and responsibility, because that's kind of a little bit how it's easier, and it will help to, ease some of those feelings that we all often have. I 100% agree, Dorrit, that leaders who role model this will have a positive effect on this, and it needs to start really with leaders owning and role modeling this if we want to make a change. But often leaders themselves, they're scared to be seen as making a mistake, so there is a bit of deliberate thought and a little bit of deliberate focus, and often some intentional conversations and training with leaders to help them understand that, hey, actually admitting to making a mistake, actually being vulnerable as a leader, not only isn't a bad thing, in fact, can have a positive effect on psychological safety and the general culture as a whole. Now, if you're wondering, how are we going in this space as an organization? One of the things we typically look at as a marker of how errors and mistakes are dealt with within an organization is the culture of underreporting. So we typically look at what proportion of incidents are underreported. And, you might be asking yourself, how do we get this data? We ask people, when we run surveys, we say, how many, incidents or near misses or have you been involved in over the last X period of time? And of those, what percentage did you report? And what the data comes back with in Australia is that we're actually about 6% higher than the national average that we've been able to get. So about 31% of incidents go unreported within Australian organisations, which a little bit scary, but also a huge opportunity because, that's a whole lot of rich data that we could be getting that could help us take a more proactive and preventative approach to dealing with safety. Now, what are the drivers of this underreporting? The three key drivers we see time and time again, firstly, and they all tap into the social space. Firstly is underappreciation. So I took care of the problem myself. Now, the funny thing about this is, as a human being, to report something, to go out of our way to write something down or go to a computer or go to a system or speak up in a toolbox talk or raise something with a leader, that takes energy for our brains. It takes us potentially stepping outside our comfort zone. Now, our brains actually are hardwired to try and conserve energy. So it's a huge effort to try and do this thing. Now, let's imagine I'm involved in a near miss or I'm involved in an incident and I go, right, I'm going to report this thing or I'm going to speak up the next toolbox talk. And I'm going to share what I think is going on. And people, they rock up, they share this information. If nothing is done with that information, if it appears to have fallen into a black hole or a void, never to be seen of or spoken about again, that often will trigger people's sense of social brains in terms of, it sometimes can impact on their status. It can sometimes impact on their sense of fairness. Particularly, it can impact on their sense of fairness if, the organisation then turns around and says that they want reporting, they want people to use the systems, or they want people to be safer. So, just not following through on something really triggers people's social brains. And you'll know this for yourselves, I'd imagine. If someone says they're going to do something, doesn't follow through, it's pretty frustrating. So real demotivator, social brain affected, cynicism starting to be created. Look, the second one's a bit more of a direct link, fear. This is that kind of headspace of shoot the messenger. These are real quotes that we've got up on the screen from our on-site safety evaluations. This particular person said, putting stuff into the reporting system can be like putting your head in a noose. So, what that results in is a whole lot of people burying stuff. Now, the interesting thing about this kind of fear-based thing that I've seen play out, and we see play out in a number of organizations, once you've got fear in your organization around reporting and around safety, once there are those red frames that safety, itself is a threat, it takes a long time to get that out of a business. And, I've been in organizations, I was with one utility company where I still remember to this day, there'd been an incident occur at another site from the site that I was on. It was about 1,000 kilometers away where, there'd been an incident, 2 people had been sacked, 4 years earlier. And the way people told that story on that site was like it had happened the day before. Quite amazing. So, if we do find ourselves with this real trigger, again, that threat response around the social piece is there. Real deliberate action needs to be taken. Look, last but not least, a little bit back to that idea of effort and a little bit about the underreporting. Like the harder the system is, the more of a social threat it is, the more challenging it is, the less likely you are to get reporting. So what can we do about it? So some hot tips that we're able to come up with. Firstly, make a deliberate effort as a leader and as a group of leaders to stay down what we call the ladder of assumption. In about 0.1 to 0.25 of a second, when something happens, we would jump to a conclusion about why that has occurred. Deliberately staying inquisitive and saying, all right, let's seek to understand is critically important if we want to start to shift that culture. So having that curiosity kind of mindset. Making it easy to report, another big one. As much as possible, looking to ensure that we don't attribute blame. Now, this is a tricky one because, everyone goes, 90% of incidents are due to the person component. And, a lot of the research says that the person component does often play a role in an incident occurring. But what our research and our experience has also shown is very rarely is it still just the person. Generally, it's been a breakdown in the system in some way, shape, or form, and the person is kind of at the pointy end of things, and they're in that position where they need to it's a make or break decision for them. So, if all of your incident investigations are leading back to just the person component, we'd really challenge you to look bigger, look deeper, do a bit of work in that space, because rarely, very rarely, is it just the human component. Reward transparent discussion, focus on process improvement. Like we do believe that holding people accountable for willful and repeated unsafe choices is important, but having a really clear process for that that's documented and led by HR is often really, really important. I think what we see play out in some organizations is I had exposure to an incident recently where there'd been a couple of people who'd had multiple written warnings about overt safety breaches, and nothing had been dealt with, and it resulted in a critical incident which could have killed multiple people. So it's about taking a balanced and fair approach and having a process that everyone is clear about, but also having a level of practicality about it, we would suggest as well. Hold systems to account and create a culture where mistakes are expected and as learning opportunities. So how do we foster accountability and participation, hazard investigation, reporting within our teams? Asking for a friend. Thank you, Andrew. Look, often the process is, questions, and giving people permission and clear expectations for how we want them to participate, and recognizing that participation. There's some facilitation skills that I often see are missing for leaders in this space. I just had a group on Tuesday. How often do we ask someone a question, and if they don't respond in the first 3 seconds, we move on and we ask another question. So, there is some deliberate facilitation skills that can be put in place. We often will talk about some of the brain-centric hazards that come into play, and that helps to create some, I guess, common language that people can talk about when it comes to things. But look, if you want people to take accountability and participate, you've got to give them the opportunity, and peppering them with questions is often a key. Last but not least, for our last 10 minutes or so, we're going to jump in really quickly and take a look at employee input in decision making. A huge one. Now, when we don't get employee input, people have a sense of a lack of control and autonomy. They feel like they've got limited control of their safety. They feel like their opinion isn't valued. Sometimes people feel like they're treated like idiots, excuse the poor language, and they feel like they're not trusted. So all these are huge impacts on social brain. So again, what we're looking for here is, how do we give opportunities for people to have input into safety decisions? Now, I think often we kind of just expect this to happen, where what we would be suggesting in this space is it's worthwhile deliberately designing a process that facilitates people having input. So, for example, let's imagine you're changing a key policy or procedure, or you're undergoing a risk assessment, or whatever the case may be. Do you have embedded in your process a consultation framework? And at what stage of that consultation framework do you have that embedded in the process? Often bringing people in earlier to the problem solving sessions can be really helpful in that particular process. One of the sites that I'm working with at the moment is starting to do this really nicely through people that they've got on site that they call enablers. So they're people that they've given a little bit of extra skill to around coaching and supporting peers in the field. These people aren't in leadership roles. They're not in official leadership roles, but they're seen as unofficial leaders on site. And that the role of this group is to actually not only support and coach, I guess unofficially across the site, but also to gather feedback and themes about decisions and the way things have been done on site, and to create a bit of a feedback loop into the senior leadership team of that site. Now, what the senior leadership team is able to do with that information is pull out key themes that they can then address proactively and have some conversations with in the workforce. And it might be anything from changes to rosters, to particular procedures, to whatever the case may be. So thinking about deliberately designing opportunities and feedback loops to draw on that information are really, really important, because if you just expect it to happen, it probably won't. Again, seeking diversity, really important. We can often go back to the same old well when it comes to getting input, because we've got those few people within our business which are always keen to share their thoughts and participate. Really stretch. I think the challenge for us is to really stretch ourselves and get other people involved. As senior leaders, and this is something I need to work on consciously myself a lot of the time, is zip it. It's excruciating sometimes. Sometimes I know, and any of my team will know that sometimes I'm not very good at this, and it takes real effort. But giving other people a chance to have the floor, you're going to get richer data. You're going to get less likelihood of groupthink coming into play, where my or your attitudes are going to impact on the attitudes and perceptions of the group, and it will ultimately create greater accountability of whatever decision is made beyond that. Look, suggestion boxes can work, but we need to put a bit of life into those. I think again, I've seen some organizations do a bit differently, where they do like ask anything things, and they're using technology to do that. So some really powerful stuff in technology, and giving people a voice to be able to raise questions to the exec that they might not otherwise be able to ask. And look, the last two are largely about facilitation. So even if someone brings up an idea that isn't wonderful, the encouragement is to recognize that person was willing to put themselves out there, thank them for their input, and either ask for them to give some more detail, or perhaps go to the board or group and see if anyone else wants to add to that person's comment. So you're sort of creating a bit of a rolling conversation with the goal of making that interaction safer. So a lot of our role of leaders is as leaders in this space is to create a space that is safe for interpersonal risk taking. So as I said there, stay curious. Defining the role of the meeting up front, really, really important. Often we can go into a meeting without a clear goal and without a clear focus. So setting that goal ahead of time is important. One thing that we've found can also work really well is if people are going to give feedback, give them time to prep. People sometimes, not everyone likes to think on the fly. Some of us, like me, just come straight off the top of your head and you speak what comes in your brain, but other people are more considered and more deliberate and need more time to think. So thinking about that is really important. Encouraging that permission to play, really important. As I sort of also covered before, we want to address groupthink where possible. So that's why leaders will speak last, but we also encourage things like getting people to individually come up with ideas, put post-it notes up on boards, and then do things like collating those ideas. So little activities like that where people can either talk to a peer and come up with ideas, or put things on a post-it note and put it up on the board and clump in ideas, may take a little bit of extra time initially, but you will often get much, much richer input much bigger, more ideas put on the table, and you'll often be able to create more psychological safety throughout that experience as well. So they're the three areas that we're suggesting a number of organisations could target to start to shift and positively move their safety culture. If you, I guess, are keen to dig into this a little bit further and you think there's something in this for you, there's a couple of ways you can explore this data and these ideas in a bit more detail. Firstly, I've had the great privilege of working with Dr. Vanessa Cook, and we've put together a book called Leading Positive Safety, where we've been able to take all of the research that we've conducted. We've taken all the research we've conducted, we've taken a whole lot of lit reviews, and we've also got the input of about 13 or 14 different organisational leaders who provided their views and perspectives and experiences around creating positive safety. And we've packaged it into one, hopefully easy to read and entertaining book. So if you want to dig a bit further, scan the QR code on the screen, you'll be able to get a copy of it. There's also a link on the screen that Corinne or Morgs has just whacked up there as well. I'll go into one more thing. If anyone's got any questions, I've got another couple of minutes that I'm happy to answer as well. Impulse purchase, great, Andrew, get into it. Look, the last one, which is a really useful resource, either as well as or instead of the book, I'd go with both personally because this one's free, is our positive safety community. So you would have seen earlier, we've had over 200,000 people go through our programs and experience our work. Every year, about 16,000 odd people kind of are going through at the moment. We had heaps of feedback to say, well, we love what you do, but we want to continue learning. So this is actually a free community, user community or potential user community that you can log into, get access to a bucket load of free resources. We've got discussion forums where you get to meet with peers, live webinars, get to meet with peers, but also there's additional intensive programs you may choose to dive into and have a look at as well. If you're keen on that, again, you can click on the link that's on the in the chat, or you can scan that QR code and take a look. So Kevin, yes, we are getting it out in an ebook version. We are also doing an Audible book, which unfortunately won't be read by yours truly with a North Queensland accent. We'll have another accent involved, but that'll be out in the next month or so as well. So that'll be available on Amazon and those sorts of things. Within the book itself will be available on Amazon within the next couple of weeks, but we'll also be getting that Audible book in the next month or 6 weeks. So I'm just having a look through the chat. Was there any, Morgs or Corinne, are there any questions that I've missed for anyone?
Yes, we've got a great question from Sarah, who asked, do you find value in or draw on HOP principles?
Yeah, HOP. Heaps of overlap between HOP, the conversation around no blame and, learning and continuous improvement, really nice overlaps between the work that we do and HOP. I think if you're going down the HOP angle, I think HOP, like anything, like safety differently, like the work we do at Sentis, like safety too. I don't actually prescribe any. I think all those areas of safety have really useful and practical insights and thoughts for organizations to improve. I just cherry pick. My encouragement would be cherry pick what works for you with your organization at this particular point in time. I think we can sometimes become a little bit like, well, I'm a HOP person, or I'm a safety two, or I'm a safety differently, or I'm a positive safety person. They've all got their little nuggets. So yeah, my encouragement always is to keep a broad lens and go, all right, well, for what we've got going on right now, that thing there is going to fit the bill. So yeah, but HOP lines up really well with these. Cool. Looks like we're starting to get people log off. So if there's any other questions, I'll give you another minute or so. But otherwise, thank you so much. It was awesome to have so many people dial in. If you want to catch up, feel free to shoot me a LinkedIn contact and happy to catch up. Otherwise, grab the book, or I'll hopefully see you in the community at some stage soon. Do I have other recommendations for resources and studies to dive deeper into? Yeah, look, Andrew, I do. So obviously I'm biased. We've got about 15 deep dive studies on our website. One is called Driving a Positive Safety Culture. It's an absolute cracker. It's, again, goes into the data, looks at the drivers of a negative and a positive safety culture. An awesome place to start. The other thing would be, I'd encourage you to jump onto the community. Those sorts of, there's a lot of conversations on there about new resources and ideas that people share as they pop up. I often look outside safety personally. When I'm looking for ideas, I'll look into sort of the neuroscience space. I'll even look into some of the things like Patrick Lencioni's work. Yeah, some really cool stuff in there, particularly around values and dysfunctional teams. So yeah, heaps of ideas there. Jump into the community and the positive safety community, you'll be able to grab some of that. Otherwise, thank you, everyone. Awesome to see you. Thanks, Corinne. Thanks, Morgs. Hope everyone has a safe Thursday, and we'll see you again next time. Cheers.